Good evening, people, and welcome to Youth Views. I am Harry Khan, as usual, for our regular Sunday night slot, streaming live on Youth Views. And as everybody commonly knows now, if you've been viewing on our channel in the past, we are as unbiased as ITV and BBC are to the Tories. So get ready for some real left-wing views and some real pro-Labour sort of chatting. But as always, we have our panel of young people, and we have Captain Swiss, who I will call our moderator for today, because he will certainly balance things out when we swing far too left. As
I think I basically serve as almost like the colour commentator at this point, don't I?
Absolutely. That's why we've got you on tonight, Swiss. So anyway, let me introduce our panel for tonight. Oh, I've got my phone buzzing away here. That's not very professional. We have very famously Captain Swiss, who has joined us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Captain Swiss. And Captain Swiss is running for an independent member of parliament in his local constituency, and no doubt we will find out a little bit more how that is going. Congratulations on your selection papers going in, by the way, Captain Swiss.
It was a relief. It was a relief, to say the least, given they got submitted a few hours before the thing closed.
I could tell on Twitter world that there was definitely some nerves there at the time. But we'll also talk a little bit later, Swiss, about that tweet that I saw at your account today about the baby. We'll talk about that later. That one was a funny moment. Anyway, we also have with us Tom. Tom is now an industry regular with us on our live stream shows. Tom, how are we, mate?
I'm all right, thanks.
Good stuff, good stuff. Good to see you, good to see you. And, you know, a live stream wouldn't be a live stream on a Sunday without our main guy, Lucas Barner. Guy, how are we?
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on again. Looking forward to talking about the most recent news.
What I love about Guy is he's messaging me in the last couple of hours going, Harry, what are we going to be talking about today, so I can make sure that I've got my research? I said, listen, we're completely freestyling today, so don't worry about research and whatnot. There are far too many Labour policies that we're losing count with. So just Google Labour policy and you'll pluck anything out. But anyway, guys, today we're going to be discussing a few things, really, but just to run through a summary so that everybody is okay with what we are going to be talking about. We're going to talk about free broadband. Obviously, that was a big policy announcement that came out from the Labour camp this week. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Fuck Boris movement, which took place, I believe, in his own constituency over the weekend. We're going to be talking about the fire up in Bolton and the effects that has had potentially on the election. We do know that every election throws either its natural disaster or its sort of political disaster, if you want to call it that. And we will be discussing how hopeless the Tories have been at responding to those disasters. We will also be talking a little bit about latest polling and how that's looking for the Labour Party and the other parties as well. Feel free to discuss. And finally, we, as well as getting an update from Swiss on his election campaign, we'll also be talking a little bit today. We're a couple of weeks down, but we're going to be asking, where the hell is that Russian interference report? So, guys, I hope we're all ready for the ride of your life on this Sunday evening. We are clashing a little bit with George Galloway's show, but I'm sure you can lend us a few views over here tonight and catch that later when time permits. So, there's no harm in starting with you. You had that quite a frenzy in the middle of the week in terms of, I know it was Thursday, the deadline to put your paperwork in. Tell us a little bit about that. What was the frenzy about?
Oh man, the frenzy was twofold basically. The first one was, as you know, I ran a crowdfunder for getting the deposit together. Yeah. And part of it was just, once you close the campaign, there's a certain number of days until the money comes out and gets reaches your bank account, and it said it would be up to 7 working days. So I had no idea when this was actually going to arrive. And in the end, the money arrived in my bank like the day before it was due to all be submitted. So I had to get that out. I was going to pay it in cash anyway because it just felt more straightforward. But I was getting that out, coming up with like daily limits on how much you can withdraw from the ATM. I'd had the crowdfunder take a certain fee out from what I'd raised, and so there was enough fun going on there. But then the other matter was just simply getting the signatures on the nomination papers, because I'd had quite a few people that I knew through work saying, "Oh yes, we'll absolutely sign it for you. You know, no problem, happy to help." But then when I finally got my copy of the electoral register off of the council, because I was a candidate, it turned out that not as many people who said they definitely lived in my constituency or were on that register actually turned out to be. Wow. So it meant that I had a few people from work who could sign it, but the rest I had to go around. I did my first bit of door knocking, and it wasn't even for votes. It was just, can you help me get on the ballot, please?
Kill two birds with one stone, Swiss, eh?
Yeah. But, you know, who knows? Maybe some of the people who signed it for me will go, well, I helped him get on the ballot. I'll chuck him a vote as well. Why not? So it was an absolutely mad rush, just because the deadline was 4 p.m., but I had a work shift starting at 3 p.m. So I really had to get everything in by 2 p.m. But we just about made it. We did.
Yeah, was it one of those sort of last minute? I remember once I was at university and having to hand this assignment in, and it was so last minute. It was literally that sort of 1 minute before 10 p.m. when the building was about to close. The security guards are outside, and it's literally like a movie moment. You're just slam dunking it into the box. Was it a little bit like that? Was it?
It felt like it. And in fact, I had said to some friends online who are still in uni at this point, this is exactly what it'll be like submitting your stuff in the final year. It's exactly the same kind of feeling. Yeah.
Good stuff. Actually, it was my dissertation, but I shouldn't admit that on camera. But anyway,
we've all done it. We've all done it. I'm sure.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, Swiss, congratulations again. I mean, just as a means of some, how have you got into the swing of campaigning now? Are you meeting people out and about and sort of literally telling everybody you meet that's in the constituency, or are you sort of waiting until you're outside of work hours and whatnot?
I have been meeting people thus far. The one thing which I think I should have done much sooner, though, was getting some flyers printed off. Yeah. Because I'm meeting people and talking to them, but I don't have any literature to give them. So I'm just having to say to them, well, if you go onto Twitter or Facebook, I've got some pages on there. So that's something that I'm going to get sorted like in the next week. Have some flyers printed off, so I've actually got stuff to give people when I go meet them. Yeah. Aside from sort of the odd spot of door knocking in between work hours, my main plans for like proper campaigning events are going to be this coming weekend and the weekend after that. I've actually got some people coming to help me out. I'm going to be sort of like setting up a little table in town centres and you know stuff along those kind of lines. Come and talk to me. Yeah. So I'd say we've been off to a slow start in terms of the in-person campaigning, but I'm getting into the swing of things now. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, let's bring some of the other guys in. Thanks for that, Swiss. And listen, we wish you all the best luck in that. And if you need any assistance and help from any of us, then you know where we are, mate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Guys, Tom, Guy, I mean, free broadband. It just sounded too good to be true when it first was broadcasted. I thought it was maybe a hoax initially, but as time went on, it sounded a little bit more sensible as things went on, and it seems to be a sign of things to come. Really, I mean, Tom, what do you think when you heard about this free broadband policy from the Labour Party?
Well, before I start, I just want to say, have you looked in the Twitter? I think Cooper Man would like to join.
Okay, I'll try and add him in when time allows. But yeah, go on.
Well, they were saying the Tories' first reaction was that unaffordable. But what was the estimates after nationalisation and bringing it to every home? They estimated about, was it £20 billion?
Yeah, 20 billion.
Roughly, yeah, give or take. And that's not an unaffordable amount, let's be honest. Each year, tax avoidance costs the government £34 billion. I mean, Labour's going to clamp down on that as one of their promises. And there you are, you've already got £34 billion to pay for that broadband, so it's not as unattainable as it's made out to be. But yeah, I think it's a good step. More people with Wi-Fi, the better. Well, not much to say about it, really. Good.
Yeah, no, one thing that I think it has done, and Swiss, obviously, you're welcome to come in and comment on this as well, is that one thing that it has done for me personally, it's generated the conversation about public ownership versus private ownership. I think that there was no doubt 2017 featured these conversations. But I think many of the voters, certainly many of the young voters that I was speaking to, didn't know too much about, what does it all mean? But actually, there is a real live example now that many individuals can relate to. Now, for example, they quote around £30 a month is the average sort of fees. I know for some of us it's a lot more. But actually, there's a real live example now of actually how you can potentially save that £30-40 a month, giving you a little bit more expenditure from your income. But at the same time, it's actually opened a debate about actually what does public ownership mean, and it's, even though the Tories, as you correctly point out, Tom, and they're going to do this on every policy that is going to sort of come out that's going to cost anything, they're going to name it down. But what it's done is it's got people thinking. Now, for example, there's a poll done about this, and I think a good 60-65% of people said yes, this is something that they would wish for. But more so, the other poll around taxing more, as you can see from the tweet on screen, companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, is actually where I think the public have really took a grasp on this. Swiss, I don't know if you've got a view on this, but would you agree with that?
I'd agree. On the basis of the public saying, we think that these big tech companies should be paying their fair share of tax and not going through loopholes to avoid it. Yes, I absolutely think the public's there on that. I'd seen some polling on the particular broadband policy that was interesting, which I think it was conducted by YouGov. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know roughly where it was. It said that a majority of the public was in favour of, if there was a policy to get people and businesses free broadband by 2025 or 2030 or whenever it is, would you be in support of it? And by and large, the public said yes to that. But then, interestingly, the mechanism that Labour wants to go about doing this is by nationalising BT's open reach, isn't it? And using that as like the structure to wheel out this service. Interestingly, the public was a lot more split. So again, you can kind of look at the difference between how questions are posed to people, can't you? It's like policy for free broadband, yes. Nationalising part of BT, not so sure. But the thing that from that at least was that amongst Labour voters, at least both Labour voters for both of those questions were quite in favour of the proposals. So I think you can definitely say, and from the attention I've seen generated by this, it's definitely a nice bit of red meat for sort of Labour supporters, people who want to see sort of Corbyn and co bringing out big sort of bold policies for this election, trying to garner a little bit of attention. And I'd agree in that sense that definitely this by far, I'd say, versus any other policy they've brought out so far, is the one that's probably had the most attention and traction, and those very supportive of it and those very much against it. I'll say quickly, because I don't want to completely dominate this thing, but on the matter of cost, I think what McDonnell has said of the policy is that apparently it would in essence pay for itself over time. His argument being that the sort of increased opportunities for business and people and productivity as a result of this free access to broadband, ultimately it will have benefits for the economy beyond the initial 20 billion, is it, or something, of the cost to nationalise this thing. The one place where I'd say that Labour needs to be cautious on, though, is that you remember last week we were talking about how the Tories had put together that little thing where Labour's policies will cost 1.2 trillion, and we'd said it had been overestimated, and they'd obviously hyped the numbers up a bit. But we do obviously need to remember that in this election, Labour of any party, I think, are making the most proposals that will cost the most money. Quite a lot more than most of the other parties, I think. And I think it was the point that was it the point that you'd made, Tom, where you said the tax loopholes, the amount that we don't recover from tax being paid, that's already however many billions. So we've got that covered already in terms of how much it would cost for the broadband. Again, I'd say I think that's a fair point to make. You can at least go, well, look, here's a place where we want to bring in some money. Here's a place where we're going to expend some money. That balances the books on it, so to speak. But Labour and by extension, I think, like Labour supporters, you need to be careful in terms of using the same incomes for different outcomes, if that makes sense. Like if you're going to say, okay, well, this Labour policy will be able to pay for this thing, you can't then use it to say, and this same Labour policy will be able to pay for that thing or that thing or that thing as well. Because I think that's the main. That's the main way that Labour's political opponents are going to attack them during this election, isn't it? It's going to be to say, okay, these are your pledges for what you want to spend, and many of it sounds like very nice things, but where will the money come from? Will it be higher taxation? Will it be higher borrowing, etc., etc.?
It's a fair point, Swiss, and I think that's there's a real electoral strategy behind this, and as we know, Labour's manifesto is coming out on Thursday, so we'll know a little bit more about what you're speculating about then. Guy, just want to bring you at this point, and one thing that we are aware of is that it seems as if the Tories' main trick for this election is about their ability to be able to deliver Brexit. But it seems that timing of the Labour Party in terms of countering where the mood and the conversation sits, every time the Tories try and grapple this election momentum and start talking about delivering Brexit, the Labour Party just seemed to come up with a bigger and a bigger conversation changer. And it certainly seemed when they delivered this policy in terms of its talking about it and its promotion, again, the pendulum swung back towards the Labour Party policy. How effective do you think that is going to be in this policy in moving the conversation away from Brexit, Guy?
I mean, obviously, as we know, and I think it's plain for anyone to see, Labour's strategy at this election is to kind of move the focus off of Brexit, which we're not majorly trusted on by the public, and talk about domestic policy. I'm a big supporter of this new the broadband policy. Obviously, it's ambitious. It is going to cost estimated £20 billion. But we've got to be clear that this is by 2030. This isn't straight away. Everyone gets it day one. We're throwing all the money.
That's correct.
I think that's the picture the Tories are trying to paint. And what I've heard is that throughout the first couple of years, it's about connecting the more rural areas who haven't had this privilege of much connection and broadband. And the argument for it by, I think it was Rebecca Long-Bailey, was that it would eventually add 1% to GDP due to the boost in productivity and the effect it would have on business. So I think if it's done right, and if it's managed, obviously not as a priority, but as a long-term goal, then we can definitely achieve it. And there were some really interesting stats that came out about the proportion of properties connected to full fibre broadband. It's 98% in South Korea, 97% in Japan, and only 10% in the UK. So clearly, even if we do something, we've got to bridge the gap. Otherwise, we can never compete with these other countries economically.
You know, it's absolutely, and you've made 2 points within there. One thing that we haven't talked about too much is about the positive effect this is going to have on businesses. And I think this is really changing the conversation where, again, the Labour Party have been known as the anti-business party. There's very little argument against it. This is going to help. In fact, this will expand businesses. And as you mentioned there, Guy, about people who want to start up business in a rural area. These days, business can't be conducted without the internet now. I mean, it's not even just about business. You can't fill in a government form without going on the internet. And it's an interesting point you made there, Guy, because I don't know if any of you guys know that John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor, came on Novara Media a couple of days ago. He was with Aaron Bastani on their show Tiski Sour. And he was asked actually about this broadband policy and how it came about. And it's amazing, really. I mean, if this is true in terms of what he said, in terms of how this policy was formed, it's a great example of how grassroots reaches, sort of goes through the trickles right up to becoming government policy, if this one is ever delivered. He said that, as we were doing the rounds and we were going and doing our regional talks to the different people up and down the country, when we were going into rural areas, there were a lot of elderly people coming from rural companies saying, and not just elderly people from different ages, but in particular, a few elderly people had said, where I am, my broadband's really crap, because they were asking the question, look, how can we change your lives? And he said it wasn't just one area, it was a few areas. And there's a statistic as well about broadband in terms of the speed that they're talking about. It's something like around 10 or 11% of actually where that real sort of strong fibre optic broadband is delivered throughout the country. And so, again, bringing that conversation back to profiteering and the private sector really only concentrating on putting the infrastructures of good broadband, really, really fast broadband, where the profit's going to make it, forgetting about those communities out in the rural areas who probably wouldn't, the assumption is made that actually if we invest this amount here, the uptake won't be there. So that's what he said, John McDonald. He said, we took that idea from just these themes that we were having from all our traveling around, and we thought we'd turn it into a government policy. And look at it. I mean, it's been trending on Twitter. The polls are showing that plus 65 upwards % are in favour of it. I think it could be a real a vote grabber in any of the other policy compared to any of the other policies. But Guy, you wanted to talk about free dental checkups as well. What are you got to say about that? Because that's a big one as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there was kind of two major policy announcements that have made the mainstream media, and it's been broadband and dental care. Kind of two things have been fed to the electorate before the manifesto. The idea behind this dental care policy is that we scrap the dental checkup costs to deliver a kind of a free dental care service. And again, when you were talking about how our manifesto is made from the grassroots, this was a policy that had come from the grassroots of the party. And a lot of people were concerned about the £22.70 charge for a basic visit to the dentist. And the evidence Corbyn put out on Twitter and in a media release was that 1 in 5 delay going to the dentist because they can't afford it. 50% of adults and 40% of children haven't been to the dentist in the last year, and 100,000 patients go to hospital every year with preventable teeth problems, and the cost of that to the NHS is £38 million. So I think the whole point of this is to save the NHS so much money due to being able to prevent these teeth problems early. When the NHS was created, dental care was actually free, and it was only made something you'd have to pay for to raise funds after the war. So the fact that we haven't returned to that fundamental principle of health being free at the point of access, including dental care, is a bit shocking, because it was only made costed so that we could raise money after the war, and now we're in a position where we should be able to pay for it. So policy I support.
Swiss, one thing about Guy is he comes with his statistics. You can't mess with him when it comes to him and guys. We should call him like Stato Guy or something like that. Really, he does come well prepared. Bless him. Well done, mate.
I'll just say quickly on what's been said so far. What I'm starting to pick up on is the pitch Labour seems to be using both for like this broadband policy and for the free dental checkups. It's about them trying to say how the costs would be offset in future, isn't it? That with broadband, the potential increase to productivity, businesses, GDP, if you will, that will ultimately offset it in the long run. With these dental checkups, like you were saying, if people are leaving things too long and then later going to the NHS with much more serious things, that can offset stuff as well. I think that as far as like a campaigning line or strategy goes, this is probably one of the best things for Labour to be using, because the counter arguments to many of their policies will be, well, all of this is going to be spending an awful lot of money. So if their pitch is to say, but in the long run, actually, it's going to be beneficial to us money wise, then that's probably just about the best sort of counter argument it's the only that sort of thing, isn't it?
Swiss, would you agree that it is taking the conversation away from Brexit, though? When the Tories are grappling with Brexit to try and move it to the front of the queue?
I'd say, I mean, obviously it's been clear since the beginning of the election that Labour's wanted to shift the conversation away from Brexit to domestic issues. Not least, as we know, because kind of their Brexit policy, they're finding it a lot more challenging to gel with the public on it than others with slightly more obvious positions. As to whether it's going to move the dial or not, I'd certainly say, like with the broadband policy, that was generating a lot more discussion. In the side chat, we had a comment, by the way, that said something along the lines of, if something's trending on Twitter, it doesn't mean an awful lot. And I'd agree. Obviously, the Twitter metric isn't the be all and end all, but if you also look at things like things being picked up for headlines on front pages, them being on national news bulletins and stuff like that, then that's probably a better indicator of it cutting through, because you know that if the media is picking up on a policy, then it's got a better chance of making it out there to the electorate as well. So I personally question whether it's possible for Labour to ultimately shift the overall focus of the election away from Brexit to domestic issues, because I think for as long as Brexit hangs over us as this thing that needs to be resolved, I doubt that's going to be possible. But if you're going to point to any policy that's had a good crack at breaking through and getting people to talk about someone else, then yeah, I'd say the broadband is probably a good one.
The thing is, though, Swiss, there's only so many times Boris Johnson in this election can go up and down the country and say, let's get Brexit done. Let's get Brexit done. Back Boris. Let's get you know, it gets a little bit sordid. It gets a little bit boring after a while, does it not?
I mean, that's the thing with political campaigns. Often you drill and you drill and you drill at one or two main key points, and that's usually seen as the most effective way to do it. But I'd argue this as much as, and I can completely appreciate, like, as Labour supporters who do care about other issues, perhaps more so than Brexit. Obviously, you want to see the debate being widened. But I would say, having a look at the opinion polls, for example, and seeing where the Tories have got themselves up to versus when Boris got into power, or even since the election was called, I'd say that even a very repetitive pitch on just one particular area, it's obviously giving them results, isn't it? I think it is, whether people like it or not, it is working to a degree.
No, you're absolutely right. And what I'm about to bring up, if we were the BBC, we would be accused of mass manipulation. But there is a poll that is quite favourable towards Labour at this moment in time, and I am about to show it on screen. And it shows Labour as +3 at 30% and the Conservatives at 34%. There's no point looking at anyone below, because Joe Swinson, you will not be Prime Minister, so forget that pipe dream now. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly closer. If we, I mean, you know, I will say that other polls are available. Just the BBC wouldn't have said that, by the way. But it's not looking bad for Labour there, is it, in terms of catching the Tories up?
No, in that particular, I mean, obviously, what I'm reading from the tweet there, it says this is a Kantar poll that's been reweighted with the 2017 age turnout.
Yeah.
Changes with the 2019 estimated turnout. So the caveat I'd add straight away is it's worth to say that this poll that you're sharing, the change indicated after the percentages is change on the same poll but with the original methodology. So there's a slight thing to pick up on there. But I mean, different pollsters are showing different things in this election. Like some
says, I'm told this poll is dodgy, he says.
Well, that's what I picked up on. Just it's worth saying that what's being shared there is a retweaking of a poll that's come out. Now, yeah. A person might wish to go, oh, well, I think the turnout amongst young people in this election is going to be the same as it was in the last one anyway. That's fair, but you know that whole meme that you get posted on the poll sometimes where it's a picture of Peter Hitchens and he goes, opinion polls aren't for measuring public opinion, they're for influencing it. Crack that and it all makes sense. Yeah. I think the point is you've always got to look at where the polls come from and the way in which it's being used.
And you know, the real complex thing, Tom, just bringing you back in here, just conscious you haven't had a chance to contribute last few minutes, but it depends on the poll and the methodology, as Swiss has just talked about. A poll can look like a poll, and you can have Labour 50 points ahead if you want to, and have a really wacky methodology around that. And obviously, with this particular poll, we've seen about actually voter turnout and age. But are you a believer in polls, Tom? What's your view on polls?
I don't tend to look at them, really, to be honest. It's just, to be honest, when have they ever accurately predicted an outcome of an election, whether it be by-election or actual national elections? And also, there's always an agenda behind it. You always have to have a look at how many people participated in the poll, or who's actually running the poll and who's funding the poll. So I just tend to not bother, to be honest. I'd rather get opinion from the doorstep.
Guy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'd probably take Tom's view. 2015, they predicted Miliband to win. It didn't happen. 2017, they said 60 to 100 Tory MP landslide. It didn't happen. I think what we all say, we'll take polls with a pinch of salt. Obviously, to an extent, you can kind of take what the public are thinking from them, but they're not the end of the world. They don't really mean a lot. The most optimistic polling without this kind of weighting methodology has the Tories at an 8-point lead. The average has them at about an 11-point lead. But coming up this week, we've got a leadership debate on Tuesday and a manifesto drop for Labour on Thursday. So by next Sunday, we could see Labour ahead in the polls. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't mean much to me.
And I think certainly if you're a Labour supporter, I think that's a real great way to look at it. I think Labour tend to do better as the underdog. We wouldn't want the momentum to necessarily stop just because we're ahead in any so-called polls. But as I say, sometimes I look at polls and they get me a bit depressed, to be honest with you. I know the Bullet Group polls are talked about on a daily basis, and sometimes I see some of them and I think, you know what? I wish I didn't see that message, because I think how polls have become so powerful in terms of mind manipulation. We look at listening to the one at the Golders Green one with Luciana Berger now, and how the Lib Dems have been known to manipulate certain polls and whatnot. The reality of the situation, for me anyway, is that nobody truly knows. A poll of the whole population is a general election, isn't it, at the end of the day? And that's the only poll that matters to me. And I think I used to pay probably more attention to the polls pre-2017. But when you had the Conservatives in the 25-point lead pre-election, and then they came back and scooped all of those points up, I basically stopped believing in polls. Having said that, I thought I'd share that little one today as a little bit of a cheeky media manipulation. As well, if the BBC and ITV can do it, why can't we? It's all good in the hood.
Can I say one last thing on polls very quickly?
Go on.
Some of the recent elections where obviously the polls haven't predicted how things have panned out, I think that's a completely spot on thing to point out, and obviously people didn't end up rather surprised with some of the recent results. But often pollsters, whether the people who share the polls on the other hand mention it is another matter, but pollsters will often say that what they're putting out there is a margin of error of usually about 3%, which means that wherever they're saying for a certain party, could be 3% higher, could be 3% lower. And if you take that into account, the polls as they are, as a method of trying to figure out how the public are going to vote, they're not that bad. They still get you roughly in the ballpark of where things are going to go. And the last thing I'll say on that is just, again, it's a completely fair criticism and observation that in the last election they were going, the Tories are going to run away with a massive landslide. They're going to get a majority of over 100 seats, and all the rest of it. But again, and yes, it's fair to say, well, the polls were the ones saying that in the first place, but the polls were saying what the respondents to the polls were telling them, you know? And obviously by the time we got to the end of the election campaign, the polls were much more closely reflecting where the actual result ended up. In the week before the 2017 election, you didn't, you weren't still having polls coming out putting the Tories on 50% and Labour on 25%. It was a fair bit closer between the two. Yeah. So I'd say absolutely. Look, I don't think anyone should use polls as a crystal ball to say this is exactly where we are and this is exactly where things will go. That's never sensible. But likewise, I'd say that the real thing to focus on when it comes to not believing the polls and stuff like that. The thing to be skeptical of is the way that people use polls and the way that people present polls, like whether it's the Lib Dems doing some dodgy tweaks and putting it in the small print at the bottom of a leaflet, or even I've got to say, like with that poll you shared, which was worth to point out, at least that was a different methodology applied to the poll that had already come out. That's a useful thing to mention as well. I think it's not so much the pollsters that can't be trusted per se. It's anyone trying to peddle a poll at you telling you it means X and it means Y without all the caveats that you need. Yeah, no, that's an absolute fair point. Absolutely, and I think it is literally just about having that balanced view and not going headstrong into believing every single point of increase. Fair point. I just want to should we go and have a look at a few comments? I know you like to do this on your streams, don't you, Swiss? Having a look at a bit of comments. So Pab2 says, I agree with Swiss. The polls were right in the last week. Well, yeah, no, that's a fair point. They were.
Can I just add on that quickly?
Go on, guy, yeah.
The polling, Some were right in the last week. So YouGov did a poll, in fairness to them, on the 7th of June, day before the election, that rightfully predicted the hung parliament. But on the day of the election, forecast UK Conservative majority of 46. The day before, another polling company, Conservative majority of 84, and the day before, Britain elects Conservative majority of 56. So again, kind of some got it right closer to the time. But even Lord Ashcroft, 2 days before the election, had a Tory majority of 64. So it's again another reason why we really cannot trust polls. And also,
yeah, I absolutely take the point you make there. And what I was trying to say is that by the end of the campaign, the polls were obviously a lot closer. Than they were at the beginning. But no, of course you're right. There were still people who got it massively off.
Final question on this one, guys. If Labour come into power, should they bring YouGov into public ownership? Come on, we had to get one of them in tonight, didn't we? One or two at least, yeah. It would certainly
then you'll get the opposite thing happening, which will be all the Tory supporters going, "Oh, that bloody YouGov ran by Labour, can't be trusted."
Listen, come on, it's going to swing. The pendulum has to swing, guys. Surely, come on, give us a bit of time as well. Fair point, guys. No, you're absolutely right, and a great debate. A great debate. So, listen, what we want to bring in next. I don't know if any of you guys heard about this. What was happening of last few days, of this weekend. Let me just share the screen. There's a significant movement in Boris Johnson's own constituency. Oh, I've lost the window there. Let me just share it so we've got some context around it. There's in Uxbridge and is it Ruislip, I think, Boris Johnson's constituency. There is a movement, #FuckBoris, which is taking place, and then every viewers can see from the video there where a number of they say around sort of 2,000 people, a crowd sort of developed. I'm not sure if it was 2,000, as many as 2,000, but certainly significant number of people. Now, the Labour candidate for that constituency, Ali Milani, has been all over the TV of late, Sky News and BBC, and he's been talking about his efforts in trying to unseat Boris Johnson in his own constituency. We've also got a similar thing going with Faiza Shaheen, parliamentary candidate for Labour, doing the same in Ian Duncan Smith's constituency, and one of you will have to remind me of the name of his constituents because I can't recall that at this moment. And there's a real momentum here going on in Uxbridge in respect of Boris Johnson and this attempt. He has a majority of, I believe, 5,000 from 2017. Now, the speculators before the general election went officially live that Boris may parachute himself into one of the safer seats. And there were rumours going around about that. And it wasn't to be, it wasn't the case. He actually did continue to stay in that seat. Now, I've got family in London who live quite close to this constituency, and there is a talk of Boris potentially a lot of disgruntled constituents, especially around, I mean, our viewers won't be surprised to hear Boris do a U-turn on anything, but apparently he's done a U-turn on his perspective that was anti-Heathrow third runway. And now I haven't heard him say that, but this is what we're hearing. What we hear from this movement.
Do you want a tiny bit of background on that quickly? Just the third. But Boris had said once upon a time that he would lie down in front of the bulldozers if it was the case that a third runway at Heathrow was to go through.
Similar to dying in a ditch, Swiss.
Of a similar vein, actually, yeah. But
no coincidence.
But I think what had happened is when the actual vote in Parliament was set to take place on it, Boris, who I think was Foreign Sec at the time still, feels like an age ago now, doesn't it? He was conveniently allowed to be out of the country on the day that this took place. So he never actually had to cast a vote in the Commons on being for or against this additional runway in Heathrow. Because otherwise, if he voted for it, he would have gone against his promise. If he voted against it, then arguably he would have had to have been kicked out of his job in the cabinet. Collective responsibility. So he managed to dodge that bullet, but yeah, it was one of them things that he'd once been really, really strongly against, and then he hasn't really mentioned it a lot since, has he?
So absolutely. So that's why people are feeling, and what these guys did, this movement, is they managed to register around 2,000 people just on that day to vote, registered to vote. Many of them young people, and let's not forget the context behind this. This was sort of the next day after the fire that happened up in Bolton at the university residence. And so I think a lot of young people, there's almost like a youth quake at the moment, an enthused number of young people. And we do know the context behind that. There has been a record number of young people registered to vote in this election in any case. But it seems as if, because it's supposed that the cladding that was on that building that caught fire was flammable cladding, it seems as if that it's erupted a bit of a youth quake. So as you can see from the video there in the tweet that I've just put on screen, 2,000 people being registered to vote potentially against Boris Johnson when he has a margin, victory margin last election of 5,000. Tom, want to bring you in here. Can Boris Johnson be unseated? I've lost you. We can't hear you, Tom. We can see your lips move.
Yeah.
We've got you.
5,000 isn't the largest of majorities, to be fair. It's not the safest seat. But then 2,000 people registered to vote. Like, I mean, come on, that's already 2/5 there. So perhaps he could be unseated. But I don't know. See, like, Boris is usually one to get quite a bit of votes regardless. He's just well-renowned across the country. But 2,000 votes, that's looking pretty promising. 2,000 people registering, and most of which will probably be against Boris by the seems of it. So I reckon he could be unseated. But whether he will resign if he's unseated,
well, I don't know if anyone on the panel knows. I certainly don't. What happens if sitting Prime Minister Swiss? You may be able to educate us on this. What happens in case it's never been seen before? It would be a historical moment.
Yeah. Oh God. That's the real question. I'm not sure if I'm amazingly well read up on what the precedent is. Obviously, originally the role of Prime Minister was the person, like going way back, it was the person who could command control of the cabinet. And obviously the cabinet was the decision-making bit of the government, and the government was just anyone who could form a majority within the House of Commons. Now, we've got, like, in terms of national leaders and political parties standing in Westminster, you have some exceptions in the modern day, like the Nicola Sturgeon's SNP, where obviously she doesn't stand as a parliamentary candidate, but she's still the leader of the party whose MPs sit in the Commons. I'm just trying to think, and the quick answer is I don't know, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head, is there like a rule in place that says you have to be a member of parliament to be Prime Minister or to sit in the cabinet? I guess maybe the workaround would be if, like, the party made Boris Johnson a Lord in the House of Lords or something, and then he'd still be able to sit within it under that capacity. But the short answer is I'm not quite sure what the precedent is supposed to be on that, so I don't know how it would affect things.
Can I share screen quickly?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If you can see here. So if the Prime Minister or a minister lost their seat,
Prime Minister would no longer be a member of Parliament. Neither government. Okay, so Prime Minister is the leader of the government and is chosen by vote of members of government. If Minister lost their seat, Prime Minister would need to appoint a new minister. Wow, interesting.
Oh, okay. So I'm trying to think then, because in the past, at least, we've had lords who have also been Prime Minister. I don't know if that would be their workaround then, to say, right, we'll make Boris a lord and then he can be PM still, or whether they just find a replacement.
Well,
possibly.
Guys, let's be straight here. I don't think we'd need to, because Jeremy Corbyn will probably win a majority and be Prime Minister in his own right in any case. But like I say, guys, viewers, it's definitely one to watch. It's a seat that I think will be the most keenest of watches on the 12th of December. Alongside that, guys, don't forget Ian Duncan Smith, Faiza Shaheen fighting that seat. Only a majority of 2,000. Ian Duncan Smith, well-known arch Brexiteer, well-known ex-leader of the Conservatives. I think.
Can I could I give you my take on the Boris seat before I go? Because I'll probably have to look to head off in the next 10 minutes. And I definitely don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but I'm just gonna give my thoughts on it. Obviously, yes, it was a 5K majority the last time round. So on the face of it, not the most marginal of marginals, but yeah, there's the scope of Labour doing incredibly well. They could take it off him. I just had a look at the list of candidates standing in the seat, and my God, as with any sitting prime minister, you've got like a load of independents and a few joke candidates in there as well.
Yeah.
I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 candidates standing in the seat, I think. Mm-hmm. But what I'd thought is if Labour was going to have a chance to oust Boris, probably the best chance of them doing that would be, say, if the Greens and the Lib Dems stood aside and sort of gave them a bit more. Not by the looks of what I'm seeing, no. According to this, there's both a Liberal Democrat and a Green candidate standing in that seat.
I heard otherwise, yeah.
The original Lib Dem candidate stood down, but then the internal party put another guy in.
Right. That'll be it.
That explains it.
Yeah.
Swinging up to her tricks again. Joe, what are you saying that, mate?
Same as what happened in Canterbury, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the other thing to factor in as well was that when we had that the announcement from the Brexit Party in the last week or so that they were going to be standing down in Tory-held seats, you could probably argue that would also benefit them in terms of whether they split the Leave vote or not. Now, UKIP's still standing, but realistically, who's voting for UKIP this time around? So I'd say that. How would I put it? If Labour pulls off some kind of a miracle that people like me don't see coming, and they do very well in the election, well, if they do well enough of a margin to see themselves into power, then quite possibly that level of swing towards them could deliver them taking Boris's seat. Yeah. But as things look at the moment, I'd say that Boris will probably hold the seat. Not by a brilliant margin, but I think he'll probably still. That's what I'm going to say for the time being.
No, Fair enough. Okay. Are you heading off then, Swiss? Then do you want me to? Because I can bring Cooper in as a replace. Is it over and out for you then?
It will. Yeah. Now's probably as good a time as any for me to shoot, just so I've got a bit of time to get ready for work.
I want to thank you again for coming on. It's been great debating the issues of today, Swiss, and it wouldn't have been the same without you. So thank you for joining us.
No problem. Can I do myself a quick plug on the way out? Yeah. It's always fun being on the other side of things, shilling for myself at the very end of a stream. Right. So my YouTube channel is Captain Swiss. You've seen my name here in the video, I think. I'm also obviously running for MP in Stoke-on-Trent North under my real name, which is Matt Dilworth. You can follow that on the Facebook page, Matt Dilworth for MP, and also a Twitter account at MD4MP. With 4 being the number 4 because I'm young and modern and like doing things like that. And as always, thanks very much to you Fuse for having me on, and to the rest of you guys I got to speak to as well. Catch you later.
Take care. All the best. See you soon.
Ta-ra.
Bye-bye.
Hello. I can't believe you guys did a stream without me.
We have Cooper Man with us. Cooper, we're going to quickly listen to what you have, because we need to be off finishing by 9 o'clock. So do you want to tell us about your experience with Owen Jones today? Do you want to introduce to our viewers who Owen Jones is?
Okay, as you guys know, if any of you know, Owen Jones is a journalist for The Guardian. Though granted, he's a bit more freelance, I suppose you could say, compared to more other Guardian journalists. But he often interviews people. He's on the left. It's often regarded as one of the more often regarded as one of the few journalists that's on the left that the mainstream knows about. Let's see, and all that stuff. He came to campaign today in Hertfordshire to try and to help canvass with one of the seats, which is Stevenage. Let's see. He was quite nice, actually, when I just briefly talked to him. When I said I joined in Easter, and he congratulated me on that. Took a nice selfie with him. And from what I can understand, he did a brief, before we went all out canvassing, he did a bit of a speech, which was actually quite good. I can't remember all the details. I should have recorded.
Good speaker, Owen Jones. Good speaker.
Oh, yeah. He had the microphone originally on, but then took it off and then didn't use it, and then just genuinely just used his natural voice. Yeah. It was pretty good, really.
Have you got any photos to share on the stream, Cooper? Is
it? Let's see. Hold on. Let me just.
A guy, that would have been your area. Did you catch up with Owen as well?
No, I was in Hartsmith for the whole of the week and did a 9 to 5 shift today on the doorstep.
Do you want to quickly tell us about that while Cooper's looking for his pick?
Yeah,
Here's one of my picks. Oops, wrong Twitter chat. Let's see.
Okay, just Cooper, just let Guy talk about his just while you're finding that. Go on, Guy. What are you saying?
it was interesting. In the morning, I was in Radlett, we were knocking quite an affluent area. We're talking quite expensive houses here, so obviously not where our target vote is. But what we were finding, not a lot of Labour support, but so many disgruntled Tories who just never cast their eyes at Boris Johnson in comparison to. They were quite enthusiastic about Cameron and May. Just the whole state of Boris Johnson's really put them off. So that's positive.
Yeah. I've always felt this, Guy, for a while, that because of the Tory party moving so far to the right at the moment, is that where are those? A lot of them won't go to the Lib Dems because of the sort of Remainy kind of
just not voting now that the Brexit.
Yeah. And that helps us, doesn't it, really, if you think about it?
I suppose it does. It's a shame that they don't feel they have an option to vote for, but a lot of the criticisms of Boris Johnson is his lack of statesmanship and the fact that he's not really a prime minister. If you can say anything about David Cameron, what some of the most cruel...
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
At least he conducted himself. I hate the man for what he did. And I was in Bournemouth in the afternoon, which is normally where our target vote is. We did have a rather unpleasant man threatening to hang, draw and quarter our campaign group. But other than that, very positive response on the doorstep. We had roads completely full of Labour voters, so many people concerned. I think the most common issue on the doorstep was probably the NHS today, and about the kind of the underfunding and the concern of where it might go in terms of Donald Trump. But overall, a really positive day.
It sounds like it's going well down there, Guy, and I wish you all the best.
I sent the image, by the way.
Okay, I can't see it. It hasn't come up yet. So
it's in the Twitter chat group.
Oh, okay. Give me a second, guys. I mean, Tom, do you want to quickly lead on this? We've only got 2 or 3 more minutes left, right? But do you want to tell me where the F this Russian interference report is?
Well, it's a good question. Well, we know that Boris has said that he won't be releasing the report until after the general election. So, well, that's pretty dodgy, not going to lie there. I mean, it sounds rather sinister because I have no idea what it can contain, of course, but it's kind of funny because do you remember on the week that he said that, they edited a picture of Keir Starmer, didn't they? The video of Keir Starmer.
Right. Yeah, they did, yeah.
Yeah, and that hit the news because they edited it and they were getting criticised for it. And to be honest, what real gain was there for doing that? Because if anything, that's just going to put them down in the polls. So it makes you wonder, why did they do that? Because there's no clear gain. Well, like my dad came up with an interesting theory saying that they probably did that as a smokescreen in order to distract the press. And so they can slip what Boris said underneath an unnoticed. Because to be fair, it sounds pretty damaging that they're not releasing the Russian interference report till after the election, which could imply that it contains something quite damaging to, of course, the Conservative Party. And you can, you can only guess that we know the Russians are quite pro-Brexit and pro-Conservative, probably gives them an opportunity to trade with us easier, being outside of the single market, but also to do with the fact that we know Russia, is it the 4th largest emitter of CO2 in the world? And of course that means their environmental regulations and standards are awfully low, which within the customs union are very high, which means trade between us is often not possible, considering that Russia is very deregulated and their standards are awfully low. Whereas if we would leave the customs union, of course, that would give us an opportunity to trade with Russia in that sense. And of course, Russia are a very large exporter of natural gas, which they would be more than happy to sell to us. And of course, then again, natural gas is something we're supposed to be cutting down on because, of course, it being a fossil fuel. So you can only just speculate about what Russia's intentions are, and this would benefit. Of course, the UK in terms of GDP. We could probably see an increase if we were to leave the EU. Over time, we would see an increase. But of course, you've got to be careful about GDP, because what does GDP mean? It's gross domestic produce. Like, you can be literally you could be like China, like what's that, 14 trillion GDP, but yet you got sweatshops, you got children working, you got people like living in slum conditions. GDP is a horrible way to measure the wealth of a nation, because a lot of the time in the UK, for instance, our GDP is 2.3 trillion, and the majority of that is in offshore bank accounts in places like the Cayman Islands, the Isle of Man, Gibraltar. GDP is never an accurate way to measure how wealthy the populace of a nation are. So we could be seeing the Tories benefit probably from exit of a customs union. We know that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, especially hedge fund manager, he would benefit personally. And again, it's just an establishment thing. Tax avoiders, of course, be missing a big EU tax avoidance clampdown, which is to be coming in the next year. And so you could imagine that the Tories would probably, and the Tories of Russian and the Russians, of course, have got a common interest there. So you can guess really was in that Russian interference report, probably some dodgy funding, I'd imagine. Nothing, I'm not sure about rigged elections, any of that crap, probably just dodgy funding, illegal funding. But yeah, it's pretty sinister, not going to lie there. But it's the fact that nobody's noticing it, the fact that it's not a common discussion in the media, because that is pretty bad news, to be fair.
Yeah. And thanks for that, Tom. I think with today's sort of breaking news as well, it wouldn't be too bad to necessarily talk or even show the screen that I'm about to. And thanks for that picture, by the way, Cooper. It was a lovely picture of Owen Jones there. I do follow him, and I got a lot of time and listen to him. But our lovely Jennifer Akuri, who's coming.
Jesus.
There is a guy, I don't know if you're aware, there is a program coming on at 11 o'clock tonight, I believe, where she has an interview with ITV, and she'll be talking about her relationship with Mr. Boris Johnson. Is it bad timing, this coming out now, Guy?
I mean, this could be interesting. Obviously, we had quite a damning report from her the other day, how she feels quite let down with Boris Johnson's complete disconnect with her. He's completely cut her off during this controversy. Obviously, his advisors will have told him to do that in its entirety, but this could be quite interesting. And just to clear up a point earlier as well, one of my colleagues just got in touch who's watching the screen and said it would be impossible for someone who's not currently sitting as an MP to be a prime minister, according to the constitution. So just wanted to clear that up as well. But we all know Boris Johnson doesn't follow precedent. So
No.
I don't really think Boris Johnson's love life will affect how people will vote for him, really. I think it's more
about
what policies he does.
It's more about the conflict of interest, with the fact that he's funneled a lot of money towards her business interests.
Yeah, I think so. I would also disagree a little bit with Cooper there, because I would say that, yes, although it shouldn't have anything to do, his personal life shouldn't have anything to do, but it all has an effect on how statesmanly he is, really. And if people can say, I'm not voting Labour because I don't like Jeremy Corbyn, then there's an equal argument for not voting Conservative because of what Boris Johnson does in his personal life. That's just my view.
Yeah, I mean, the whole controversy around this is the conflict of interest, and the fact that if he's found to, say, have a more intimate relationship than he's claimed with her, one, he will have lied again, but two, also that it comes into question, has he given her this money because there was a kind of a deeper relationship behind that? And then you start getting involved with the law and it gets interesting. But there's certainly more to this than just a kind of a personal life, if you know.
Sky Echo 7 says, so glad I've not got a TV. I mean, you just can't make it up. It's turning out to be an interesting election, guys. And I think, look, what I want to do before I wrap up, I want to thank everybody for coming on, especially Swiss, who had to leave us a little bit early so he can get to grind on on his work shift. Cooper, thank you for coming on very last minute to share your experiences of meeting Owen Jones today. And Guy and Tom, as always, excellent analysis and research you do into the stream. I think it's been a great stream. Thoroughly enjoyed it tonight. Really? Guys, don't forget to continue to share, like, retweet, follow us on Twitter at Youth Views, and that's with a Z on the end. I've been Ari Khan. I look forward to seeing you all soon, and thank you for our streamers for coming on. We've got another stream on in the week, and we'll be posting details of that as days go on. Take care, guys, and God bless.